Sir. Well, welcome everyone to my weekly webinar and mentoring advice and trying to help as many people as I can. And we have one question from the audience to start before I start into my continued history in my development of Jackson Hewitt and Liberty and now Loyalty Brands. So let me start with this question. The question, what experience helped you find your purpose in life? And my first, I immediately I said, I'm a skim reader. I skimmed it very quickly. And my first thought is, okay, the question is related to business and how did I find my occupation and the tax industry and so forth. And I said, no, the question is purpose in life. And I wonder how many of you have decided what your purpose in life is. And in my purpose is reflected in the mission statement of our company, and that is having fun, improving lives. And having fun is just an aside. That life is too short. You don't want to waste your time doing things that you don't love to do. Find what you love to do and work hard. So my purpose is the same as the mission statement of the company, and that's to improve lives. And it took me a while to get there and to realize what my purpose was. Not sure when that aha moment came or the epiphany came or I realized, but in looking back is how did I learn or find my purpose? How did I find that improving lives was the purpose of my life? And it comes down, it certainly was almost exclusively the influence of my parents. And part of that influence, of course, is the introduction to God. And the combination of watching them influence other lives and be giving and do things for others was just impressive and it made me want to be like them. I mean, one thing that I can recall at a very early age, for some reason, my father was a loner. He was an introvert and a loner. He could have been a mountain man. He could have been a hermit. He was a loner kind of guy. And for some reason, that set him apart from my mom's family. My mom was the opposite. She was all giving and social and talkative. And she cried when she was sad. She cried when she was happy. She cried just because. She told us she loved us every day, if not every hour. I mean, she was just effervescent and personable and beloved by everyone. And it was hard to get to know my dad. The people that got to know him loved him, but we very early we never lived too near my mother's family. I was born when my dad was at Michigan State, which is in Lansing, which is back then in the early 50s was not an easy trek from Detroit. And by the time I was 4, we moved to upstate New York and did not see much of my mom's family. So he was a bit ostracized. But one of the things he did early, even though he was ostracized by my mom's family a bit, I mean, they didn't really know him, so they didn't like him or reach out to him or interact with him. And it's not that they disliked him, it's just that they didn't know. And but despite that, my mom's older sister, my mom was the second of six children. And her older sister moved from Detroit to California, had an abusive husband and separated, and she had four children. And even though we were poor, we grew up poor. And even though we are poor, every month on the first, my dad would write a check, and I don't know what the check was. Maybe it was $10. I mean, this is in the 1953 or four or five, long ago. A dollar was worth 5 or 6 times what it is today, and he would stroke a check the beginning every month and put it in the mail to my mom's sister. So that was the kind of things that they did, and they were always there for their friends and relatives, and helping people as best they could. And so I learned about giving and the joy in the giving and the reward of giving very early in life. And of course, that is um, uh, totally influenced by God and my relationship with God, that God requires you to give back. And I've been so blessed in my life that, I mean, it's the only reason I've lived anywhere near this long, because of all my shenanigans. The only reason I've lived this long is God has a purpose for me, and that's to improve lives. My purpose is to pay it forward and improve lives. So I learned that at a very young age, and it was from my parents, and then watching them, and then learning from them, and then part of that was introduction to God. And when I got into troubles as a kid, my parents were always there for me, even though I was rebellious and aggravating to my teachers and even my friends, and let alone my enemies. Then my parents were always there for me, and so was God. So it came from, I give all that credit to my parents and my upbringing. And because, in one of my theories is, in school, they don't teach you the foremost and important things in life. They don't teach you anymore. They don't teach you about God. They don't teach you how to be a significant other. They don't teach you how to raise children, and they don't teach you how to be financially independent. So the four most important things in life, they're not teaching you in school. And so you're limited by what you see and learn from your male and female role model. I was fortunate to have a great one of each, very extraordinarily blessed. And then the school of hard knocks, because you're going to fail, you're going to not listen, you're going to make mistakes, and the school of hard knocks. Unfortunately, they don't teach that in school, and so hopefully someday that will change, and we will better prepare our young for the future. So, having answered that question, let me go on to talk about lessons learned in the journey. And there are, I don't usually talk about this, but there are several things that I've invented in this industry that are, very simple things that, when I say invented, I'm sure others, at some point, others might have done it or were doing it, but I made them a big thing. I made them a big thing because of how big my companies were. So one of the things, for example, I remember in about 1978, I had an office supervisor, and back then the average fee for a tax return was about $25. And I had an office supervisor in Horseheads, New York, that worked for me when I was a district manager, and a suburb of Elmira. And her name was Diane Comfort. And she said, I have this one customer that keeps referring people to me. This customer's referred like 6 or 7 people. Can't I do something for them? And how about if we give them $5 each time, or buy them breakfast or something. And so I remember I sent back then there was no such thing as email. This is 1978. There was no internet. And so I sent a handwritten request of my boss. Can we institute a $5 referral fee, to a referral payment to customers that refer a new customer? And he said, no, just no, no. So that was 4 years later when I started Jackson Hewitt, when we bought Mel Jackson and eventually changed the name to Jackson Hewitt. 4 years later, first thing I did is implement a referral fee to customers. Refer a friend. We called it a RAF, refer a friend. And it didn't happen overnight, but within 3 or 4 years, H&R Block copied, and they had their version of paying a fee for recommending a friend. And then, of course, when I started Liberty Tax had a referral fee. And of course, now at ATEX has a referral fee. It's industry standard now, but back in 1982, when we started Jackson Hewitt, there was no such thing. So that was kind of a simple invention. Maybe other mom and pops were doing it, but certainly none of the national players were doing it. So that was an invention, came about by listening to one of my office supervisors giving me advice on better ways to serve the customer. And that's key in building great companies, is listening to your customer through the people that deal with the customer. Another thing that I probably am the first person that invented this is, and I'm going to talk about the development of electronic filing in a minute, because it needs to be recorded and go down in, so it's always, this history is not well known and not well remembered. And electronic filing started in 1986. But I invented one thing related to electronic filing that it took H&R Block 10 years to copy. So back when electronic filing started in 1986, there was only two national companies. Block had 9,000 locations, and Jackson Hewitt in 1986, we had about 300 locations. So 9,300. There was no other national company, and very few companies participate in electronic filing. And most of the tax preparation world was kind of dragged into it. But what I decided to do is H&R Block and our competitors would have a electronic filing fee. So back then, now we're up to 1986, the average fee is about $100. So if you wanted to electronically file, they would charge the customer another $25. Well, if you had electronic filing in your office, if you had the capability of sending the return electronically from your computer to the IRS, then it cost almost nothing. It didn't cost $1. Once you acquired the computers and everything was computerized, the additional cost to send it, back then we would send it by modem. There was no internet, so you'd send it by modem, dial-up modem. Back in the 80s, you would dial in and send it to the IRS by modem. And so it required a little bit extra work, but it wasn't but $1 or $2 a return. But the companies that were doing it were trying to recoup their investment in computers by charging this extra electronic filing fee. So, for example, let's say that you had group of offices, a H&R Block district that was doing 10,000 returns, and 1,000 of them filed electronically, and you charged $25 per electronic return. Then you would get $25,000. But I said, no, that doesn't make sense. I said, that's like going to McDonald's and you pay, and even back then, I believe, and this certainly was in my lifetime, and I don't remember how long they stopped doing it, but it was different for a hamburger and a cheeseburger. I remember the first hamburger chain we had, it was like 15 cents for a hamburger and 20 cents for a cheeseburger. And so, but to me, adding the extra cost for electronic filing was adding, that's like you charge extra for the pickles, extra for the mustard, extra for the ketchup, extra for the bun. You pay all these extra fees and you're nickel and dime the customer. And the customer doesn't want to hear that. They want one fee. They want one fee. And that used to happen in industry after industry. And most of you aren't old enough to remember, but back when I was a kid, cars didn't come with air conditioning, and they didn't come with seatbelts. They didn't even invent seatbelts until the 60s, and air conditioning. So you would have to, and radios. I remember my parents were, when we were poor still, there was a advertisement in the newspaper for, I think it was a Gremlin, a little green box car, and they were getting a second car for the first time for my mom, and it said $4,992. And they went down to the dealership and they said, no, you got to pay extra for the radio and extra for the air conditioning, extra for the seatbelt, and it was like $800 extra. And my dad and my mom said, no, we're not paying that. We're only paying X. So they had to wait many weeks to get a automobile that had nothing on it. And I don't even remember, it may not have had back seats, may not have had the back seats, but again, that was a long time ago. And everything came with a different price on it. But I said, no, what makes more sense is if you have 10,000 customers and most of them would qualify for electronic filing, at least 30 or 40% of them back then. They didn't have all the forms when they started electronic filing available for electronic filing. So if you had a capital gains sheet, you couldn't electronically file that. The IRS wasn't sophisticated enough to include that in the package. So not every tax return qualified for electronic filing. Back then it was less than 50%. Today it's not even 100% today, but it's 95% qualified for electronic filing. But I said, instead of charging 1,000 customers $25 each, then and 3,000 customers will qualify, why don't we charge all 10,000 $2.50 a piece and raise our fee $2.50 and then include it for free? So that's what we did. We did not have a electronic filing fee for customers that electronically file, and we included it. So now think about when you go into so we could advertise free electronic filing, automatically free electronic filing with your tax return, and that gave us a competitive advantage. In addition to that, the other 2,000 returns that we sent electronically, they got better service, because back then you would get your refund initially. It used to be you'd get your refund in 4 to 6 weeks if you filed by mail. If you filed by the end of January, you get your refund by mail. You get your refund in 4 weeks. If you filed in February, it'd be 6 weeks. Well, through electronic filing, it was about 3 weeks. So we gave it to everyone, and so people that weren't paying for it were getting better service than our competitors, who, when a customer didn't pay for it, they took 6 weeks to get their refund, or 4, 5, 6 weeks, where our customers were getting them faster on average. So it was a competitive advantage. So this went on it took H&R Block probably 10 years before they changed and included the electronic filing for free with the tax return. But they finally admitted by their steps, by what they did, they admitted it was better service and superior service. And of course, over the years now, virtually no one charges extra for electronic filing. It's included in the fee. It became industry standard. But I personally invented that just in thinking about and watching other industries. And Sam Walton said, you don't just learn from your own industry, you learn from all your customer experiences. So I took my customer experiences from other other examples and brought it to the tax preparation industry, and was always cutting edge. And Block would copy me and copy us at Jackson Hewitt or eventually Liberty, but it would take them. They wouldn't do it the first year. It would take them a while to do that. It reminds me of when Hertz and Avis. When Hertz started, he flew into an airport in Los Angeles, and he had to take a cab into the city, and then to rent a car from a car dealer. They didn't have rental car companies back when they started Hertz, and he said, "Wow, they should. That's crazy that I have to take a cab all the way into the city. There should be one near the airport." And so they became great and huge by putting their locations near the airport and getting the customers that were getting off planes. Well, Walter Apis walked into an airport a few years later, and he said, "Why do I have to go to the airport, get on a bus, and go somewhere to sign in for my Hertz car? Look at that little space there near baggage claim. I could put a little kiosk there, and I could sign them up at the airport. Then you don't even have to. Then they'd be all prepared by the time they took the bus. They'd just walk to their car." And it was funny because Hertz, Avis began doing that, and Hertz for about 3 years, I believe, said, "That's not going to work. That's not going to work. That's not going to work." And of course, they eventually said, "Oops, that's working." And now you can't go to an airport that has an Avis that doesn't have a Hertz and other competitors. So, but they said they poo-pawed it initially that that's not going to work. And so I'm sure that was the thinking at H&R Block when we were inventing these things and on the cutting edge back in the 80s and 90s, that they were looking at us and said, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. And of course, one of the things they never understood, almost no one understands if you don't do it, is one of the things we invented that I invented at Liberty was the Statue of Liberty costume. And H&R Block made so much fun of it over the years. One time they had a meeting, and a manager's meeting, and they gave everyone in the meeting some Nerf balls. And then they had a couple Lady Liberties running through the audience, and everyone laughed and laughed because they would throw the Nerf balls and try to hit the Lady Liberties as they were running through the audience. And they just laughed and laughed at us. But the obvious thing they're missing is, if our franchisees are putting Lady Liberties out on the street day after day from January through April, it must be working or they wouldn't do it. So instead of copying it, instead of trying to emulate it and to compete with it, they just laughed at it. And they once they changed, and a couple times they experimented in several areas. They had a guy, and their silly trademark is a green cube. So they had, in a couple markets, they tried to compete with us. They put a guy in green tights and had a green cube from the waist up, that, and with arms, you had your arms through it, and he would walk around, but it would look so stupid, or for whatever reason, it never caught on, and they discontinued it. But Our Lady Liberty, really, it was one of the major reasons that the whole guerrilla marketing differentiator at Liberty made us. We not only grew faster than H&R Block, we grew faster than H&R Block and Jackson Hewitt combined. We almost opened a new store a day for 12 years. In 12 years, we averaged 330 new stores a year, which is top 10 ever in the history of franchising, 4,000 locations. And having that Lady Liberty out in front of the locations dancing and business to business and having roadside parties, that was one of the biggest differentiators that propelled us to that. But I promised to talk about the start of electronic filing, and so almost none of you know this story. So I'm going to take you back to the first days, and this is a time when no one was computerized except for Jackson Hewitt, and the H&R Block was not computerized at all, and the IRS invented electronic filing. And it was they tested it in 1986. They tested it. Most people would think, wow, they're just rolled it out nationally. Well, no, you had to be in either Phoenix, Cincinnati, or Raleigh-Durham. Only 3 areas of the country. The zip codes in those areas could file electronically. And so the first year, there was only 25,000 returns filed electronically in the whole country. Now there are 150 million. But back in 1986, 3 cities, and we weren't part of it. We were watching it enviously from Virginia Beach, but we didn't participate. So in 1987 tax season, they selected 4 more cities, and one of them was Virginia Beach. And they selected, years later, the 2 guys that led the electronic filing program. One of them was Lenny Holtz. Lenny came to work for me as chief operating officer eventually at Liberty Tax. But he said the reason they picked Virginia Beach is because we were the biggest filer of computerized tax returns in the country, and at Jackson Hewitt, and we were headquartered in Virginia Beach. So we embraced it immediately. And so now they had 7 cities that were offering electronic filing. And so the first year we embraced it so much that in our area, there was H&R Block was doing it, and a handful of mom and pops, mostly CPAs, were doing electronic filing. And there was, even though H&R Block had about 70 locations in Virginia Beach, and Jackson Hewitt had less than half of that, there was 5,200 returns sent electronically from Virginia Beach, and 2,500 of them were sent by us. So we had almost half the business, even though there were other competitors, plus Block had twice as many offices. And of course, one of the reasons was we not only did we embrace it, but we included in the price of the return. So a lot higher percentage of our returns were being sent electronically than the competitors' returns. Well, I've been dealing with the IRS for 55 years, and this is by far the most cooperative, interested, friendly the IRS ever was starting electronic filing. So each February, starting in February of 1987, they called in the big players to get their feedback on improving electronic filing. And so we were one, even though there was only 75,000 returns sent electronically the second year, and half of them, more than half of them, were H&R Block. But all of the software companies, and there was only a handful of software companies, all the software companies were embracing electronic filing. They, the ones that back then you would fill out a sheet and send it and mail it in to, or fax it in to a software company to do your return on a computer for those that were using a computer. You didn't prepare it at the desk like we were doing at Jackson Hewitt. We're the only ones that had desktop software that was in every one of our offices, and we were ahead of the curve. So they would call us in February, and we would ask us advice. Well, in order to qualify for electronic filing in 1986, the IRS sent 50 tax returns. And with the 50 tax returns we received in September of 1986, you had to electronic file them before the season started in order to qualify. And in the instructions of the test, it said, well, there's 3 errors in these 50 returns, and that you have to catch when you send it in. And so we called them a few days later and said, of the 172 errors, which are the 3 you want us to catch? They were just so horrible. The IRS learned they were not good at doing tax returns by hand. And so the test was full of errors, and just unbelievable number of errors. And so one of the advice I gave in February is said, your test needs to be, it's an embarrassment. You need to, how about if you do this? I said, how about if Virginia Beach is only 3-hour drive from Washington. How about if you you prepare the test, getting ready to send out, and you come down to Virginia Beach, and we'll correct all the errors before you send it out. And so they did that. They sent a team down, but they only sent them down for a couple of days. And we didn't even have time to fix all the errors in a couple of days. So they sent the test out again, full of errors, not nearly as many as the first year. And so next February, 88, we come in, and everyone says the test is horrible. You made so many mistakes. And so we, at Jackson Hewitt, and this is little known or thought about, for 3 years in a row, the IRS hired us as a sole source provider of the test. And what that means is no other vendor got to bid on it, because we were the only vendor that was capable of preparing the test for all the other filers in the country. And so not only did we get revenue for 3 years we had this for 3 years until the competitors started to complain, because it would give us first crack at all. When we prepared the test, every year there's changes in IRS forms. We would get the forms earlier than everyone else. And so we'd have a competitive advantage in preparing our software. And plus, we had a very close relationship with the IRS. So finally, our competitors complained, and they put it out for bid, for others to be able to bid on preparing that test. But we had that sole source relationship. And one of our founders, and I mentioned him last week, Dan Grunberg, the PhD from MIT that had come to work for us. He had a company. He was self-employed in Massachusetts, and he actually bid, and he and his partners did the first electronic filing software for the government for the state of New York and the state of Oregon. They prepared the software to receive electronic filing for the states, because not only were we dealing with the federal government, the states were beginning to implement electronic filing, and they didn't do it real quickly either. So we actually at Jackson Hewitt and our team, and Dan came to work for me as chief technology officer. after that. But we prepared software for several states. So we were very intricately related to electronic filing at its inception. Some ramifications of it rolled out. The H&R Block has always been conservative and about spending money. So they after the next year, they were in 7 cities. They went to 10 states, and then they went to 20 states. And it took about 5 years from 1986 until 91 or 92 before everyone in the country could electronically file, and they were ready to receive it because technology was so antiquated that you can't. I mean, someone that has a cell phone today can't even imagine how antiquated it was back then. For example, when electronic filing started, laser printers, you couldn't get a laser printer for less than $25,000, and so taxpayers couldn't afford laser printers, so they had to use dot matrix printers, and that I won't even take the time to explain how complicated it is to print out a tax return and copies on a dot matrix printer. But if even though most of you probably haven't even used a dot matrix printer, but it was just very rudimentary back in the day. So along, and then came after that season, and the banks invented beneficial finance, invented a loan program on refunds, and so they tested that in 1988. So the third year, we had a loan program, and a couple other banks came into the beneficial finance had always wanted to make money off of electronic filing. They actually were the second largest tax preparer in the country when I started Jackson Hewitt. Beneficial finance they were a signature loan company up to about $5,000 that had about 600 offices around the country. But they were primarily a bank, and they wanted to make loans to individuals. And so they kind of invented the loan program on electronic filing. And back in 1988, they came out with a loan program that you could, instead of waiting for 3 weeks to get your refund, you get a loan, and that would take about 3 days. And at the same time, other banks began to join. Sears had a bank, and it was Greenwood. It was called Greenwood Trust, and they entered the lending business. And then Mellon Bank out of Pittsburgh, for some reason they decided to jump into the fray. Well, it failed because the loan program initially failed because the IRS would hold some of the refunds for back taxes or child support or student loans. So in 1988, the banks lost too much money, so they stopped the loan program. They actually, though, they convinced the IRS that because the IRS was trying to grow electronic filing, and that the loan really, wherever they offered the loan, it really spurred electronic filing, because now you could go to a customer and say, get your money in 3 days and set your refund. And for most of the low-income Americans, the bottom income earners of the country, the bottom half of the country, say, that refund is the biggest check they get all year long. They may get a few hundred a week in their take-home pay, but the average refunds is in the thousands. So there's some element of the U.S. population that has already spent that money, and mentally, and or they have a bigger Christmas and don't pay their January rent and wait for the refund to catch up on their rent just so they can have a bigger Christmas. It's sort of they borrow from themselves. So there's a huge demand, and that was satiated with the loan product. So after it failed abysmally, and Greenwood Trust fell out of the industry, then they brought in what they called the debt indicator. So the IRS, when you sent in the return, the IRS would tell you whether the person had student loans or back taxes or child support, and they were going to hold their refund. So now the banks could, in much greater confidence, lend money to people that would not have normally had bad credit scores, had poor credit scores, couldn't go and get a loan anywhere. Now, if you have a $3,000 refund coming, you would get your tax return electronically with the you could get a loan on your refund. Well, that for that some interesting things happen because of that. One is in H&R Block was so conservative that they didn't, the IRS moved faster than H&R Block did, which is sort of hard to believe that. And H&R Block was a Fortune 500 company, but they were very conservative and didn't want to spend a lot of money. They never did. When I started with Block, we didn't have desks. We made desks with it. You would buy a door at a hardware store, and then you would put legs on it and make it your own desk for a third of the cost of building a desk. And so, I mean, it was a very cheap company back in the day. And so they didn't go into, so I learned a lesson in Chicago. First of all, H&R Block did not go in to Chicago. So at Jackson Hewitt, we had a huge competitive advantage. We could offer a loan on your refund in 3 days. And so they had a franchisee in Round Lake, which is about, if you know the geography, is about an hour out of downtown Chicago, way in the boondocks. But anyone from H&R Block that wanted a customer that wanted a loan would have to drive all the way out to Round Rock and to get a loan. So Round Rock had a great year, but most of the customers didn't qualify for the refund. But I learned a valuable lesson on bad press back then, because they say no press is bad press, and which is hard to believe, but here's an example of how it was great for us. So we had a competitive advantage. And remember, back then there's only two national players. There's H&R Block and Jackson Hewitt. Well, we advertised getting your refund in 3 days. And remember, the rest of the market, Block didn't have any electronic filing. Almost no other competitor had electronic filing. And so it would take 21 days to get your refund. So we're the place you can get it in 3 days. Well, with one of the customers, we made a mistake. And it took 7 days to get the refund. So there was one of those expose TV shows or news shows that where customers are getting screwed. They go out and they confront the vendor and ask them, well, what are you going to do about it? And blah, blah, blah. So they call up, they're terrified in Chicago. The big news, ABC or NBC or CBS, they were headed down and they were going to do an expose because we screwed up and it took us 7 days to get the refund. And so instead of 3. So they said, what are you going to do? I said, you're going to be honest. And we refunded the customer's money. We gave them a coupon for a free return next year. So we refunded all his money. We gave him a coupon for next year and said, that's what we're doing. That's what we do. That's what we did for them. So it was amazing to me that, and they were terrified because they were going to it was going to be blasted on the news that we had screwed up and how bad for our reputation. Well, the news comes in, they do the story, they go on the 11 o'clock news, and the phone rang off the hook. the phone rang off the hook in our offices. Is this the place where I can get my money in 7 days? Is this the place I can get my money in 7 days? So they weren't they weren't at all concerned about getting the refund in 3 days. They didn't hear that part of it. They were used to getting their refund in 3 weeks, it's in 21 days, and or no, they were used to getting it in 6 weeks because this is the first year they offered electronic filing in Chicago. So it's normally 6 weeks. People are waiting for the money, but they could get electronic filing, get it in 3, or get a loan. And they said, "Is this the place I get their money in 3 weeks?" And so as a result, the strongest market for Jackson Hewitt in the whole country ever, and still is Chicago, because they had a competitive advantage for H&R Block for 1 year, where we had the only place that you could get the refund was in or get a loan on your refund was in Chicago. So another lesson at about the same time that I learned at Jackson Hewitt that is today a differentiator in all of our 8 brands at soon to be 9 brands, by the way, at Loyalty Brands, where we'll be opening a storefront grooming service next month and in June. So in June, July, might be July 1st, as late as July 1st, but sometime between June 1st and July 1st, we'll be opening a storefront grooming service. But in all of our businesses and all of our franchisors, we have a differentiator, competitive advantage because of this experience. So during this time, I had the director of the National Advisory Council. His name was Kim Hughes, and there were 2 large preparers in Chicago. One was Bob Kukler, and the other was Kim Hughes. And Kim had worked with me at H&R Block when we were side by side district managers in upstate New York back in the 70s. And he eventually came to work with me, and then became a franchisee in Chicago at Jackson Hewitt. So many people have followed me over the years that he was just one of them. And I saw him at a convention, and they had significant increases in fees. And we learned that you don't have to beat your competitor in both price and service. You have to beat them on one or the other. And there's no value in undercharging versus your competitor, because someone's always going to charge lower than you, even if they go out of business. So the real value is offering a better service and be worth it, and provide better services, better service, be worth it, and then you get equal or higher fees. So we were lower than Block in Chicago. So each of them raised their fees up. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was back then, it seems like one went from an average, pretend they had the same average fee of about 74. One went to up $20 to 94, and one went up $17 to 91. Sizable, almost 20% increase to catch up to where they should be. And Kukler had a bigger growth in returns and a higher average fee increase. And so I said to Kim in the hallway of the convention, I said, "Well, congratulations on a big year. You had a good growth in returns, great growth in fees, and but Kukler beat you." And I like to needle people and help. Gives them incentive to think about growing and fighting, and I mean that's good. That's good leadership, to tease people into doing better. And so he said, "Yeah, but next year he's going to pay. He's going to pay." So I thought about it for overnight, and the next day I said to him, "Well, I think how about if we do a test, and we'll get a neutral party to call 100 of your customers and 100 of Kukler's customers, and see how satisfied they were. Get a ranking of 1 to 5. And then I bet you his ranking is better than your ranking. And he said, okay, you're on. Now I usually only bet $1. Because I compete, I'm very fast to enter a competition. But this time I bet $5. And I said, and so we'll agree on a neutral franchisee that will call 100 of yours and 100 of his. And there was a franchisee a beloved franchisee, I think it was in Round Lake that I referred to earlier, up northwest of Chicago. Her name was Joni Gladwitz, sweet lady. And we hired her to call customers. And of course, if you're going to get 100 answers, you have to make a call up. And especially if you're calling in August or September, it's going to take you 400 or 500 calls per office. So we finance the calls to get 100 responses from each of their customers. Well, I won my $5, by the way, and Kugler had a bigger increase, by the way, next year. But the most surprising thing to me was that the response that Joni Gladwitz, she was so tickled and so pleased. The customers liked to be called. And she said she got such great answers, she went and called up all of her customers. And the retention rate we learned quickly, the retention rate on the customers we talked to was 10% higher than customers we didn't call. And so we learned that calling customers is a very inexpensive, valuable tool in increasing retention. They like to be called. And not only is it a value in our industry, it can be a value in any industry. And no one in this country is doing it. The only ones, I ask hundreds of people a year, 1,000 people a year, has any business called you? And routinely, the only people that can say yes are as if they bought a new car. Then the car dealer will call them and ask them. But virtually no other industry. And not only so we learned this lesson by that competitive discussion and researching and trying new things. We learned that. And then we added to the program, because what I found in my career, and this is true, our fastest 2 brands that are growing today are Zoom and Grooming, mobile dog grooming, and ATAX, our tax. We're both fastest in those industries. And what I've learned is that tax preparers they don't do a good job of asking for a referral. You can ask them to, you can explain why it's important. You can try to reward them with bonuses based on referrals coming in. I pulled out my hair trying to figure out a way to motivate taxpayers to do a good job of asking for a referral. Never happened. And I learned now in grooming, it's the same thing. For some reason, I think 95% of people are operational, and only 5% are marketing oriented, and that are happy. They can talk to anyone. They're friends. They never met a person that wasn't a friend. There's those outgoing people like my mom was, for example, that are just, everyone loves them. But most people are like me or my dad, and we're uncomfortable asking for something, and even if we've done a good job. So what we learned to add to the call is that, please, do you know anyone else that might benefit from our service? And so our referrals go up 50%. So we talk to a customer, our retention goes up double digits, our referrals goes up 50%, and then you get all the extra benefit of finding out during the tax season or during the year before it becomes a problem, you find out if how the customer feels. When you survey customers with by email or by postcard or by handouts, only the most happy or unhappy people respond to those. You get a very low response. Back before we invented that, what we did at H&R Block and we did at Jackson Hewitt, we would mail out 20 postcards a year to customers and with a questionnaire on it. And only not ever 10% responded to them, even though it was a postcard with a return mail stamp on it. When you sent it out, not 10% responded. When you call customers, they virtually all talk to you. If they don't talk to you, then they must have some issue and you need to take some further action. So that's, again, lessons learned at the journey through my Jackson Hewitt life. And the beauty of my career is, the blessing is, I got to do it for 15 years, and then I got to start all over again. And so I learned all those lessons from day one about, again, refer friends, of calling customers, of including electronic filing fee. And we were blessed with all the lessons that I learned from the first time to be able to do it, hit the ground running. And that's why in 12 years at Jackson Hewitt, I only had 800 stores. In 12 years at Liberty, I had 4,000 stores. So 800 and 4,000, most of it was related to all the lessons I had learned on the journey. So thank you for the time this week, and look forward to talking to you next week. If you have questions, you can always mail them in advance or put them into the chat during my presentation. Happy to help. And again, our mission statement is having fun, improving lives. Have a great day.